good over here, buddy? You comfortable? You set up nice? Okay, just making sure. Oh, hello. What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it, a magic. And today, it's the first Brewer's Choice of the season. Usually, I leave the decks up to my patrons, but every now and again, I like to take things in my own hands and give you a deck that I'm super excited about, but that's okay. This is actually, coincidentally, the deck that finished second in the last patron poll, so there you go, patrons. But anyway, today, Mono-Black beats. Oh, and you may have noticed and commented at length already. Yeah, we're back on the couch. Look at that. Yeah, I think I'm going to do every Brewer's Choice this season, about once a week or so, from the couch, just for the nostalgia factors. I know a lot of you guys have already commented, like a lot of you have commented, that you missed the couch. You know, I kind of missed the couch too. I feel comfortable over here. I'm in my groove. So let's do like once a week like this, you guys. Let's get back to the couch. And here comes Ziggy. You get to like stretch out again now, bub. You're going to be so comfy. But on to the best Mono-Black Aggro deck in a really long time, and I know that because I do Mono-Black Aggro pretty much every season. This is easily the best it's ever been because we got a couple of specific pieces that this deck has always needed. The best of which is definitely Spawn of Mayhem. That's why we're going to just call this deck Mono-Black Spawn or Mono-Black Mayhem, whatever you want, because this is easily the most important card in the deck. You see, Mono-Black Aggro exists in pretty much every format, and usually in a budget form, which is why I like to profile this deck at least once a season, but usually it's just full of, 1 and 2 drop creatures. You play really low land count, and you try to strike fast, maybe get some combat tricks in there, take advantage of Black's removal. There's some tricks you got, but you have no real way of finishing the game 90% of the time at a reasonable cost in a deck that plays such a low land count. But Spawn of Mayhem fixes all of those problems. We have a real finisher that doesn't even have to attack to get the last couple of points of damage in for us. Card is just everything the deck has wanted for the last, multiple years, and I can't stress that enough. It's a curve topper. It's usually just going to cost you 3 mana, but you don't mind paying 4 mana for this. It's a finisher, and it's a way to get advantage as the game goes on. It's because it's always going to get a little bit bigger on turns where you're below 10 life, and it's always going to at least deal the 1 damage. So again, even if it can't necessarily get through for combat damage, just extending the game to the point where this will do a bolt's worth of damage will sometimes be enough to finish things. Let's move on to the other, biggest payoff, the other big, tool that this deck got to actually become viable, and that's, believe it or not, Drill Bit. Now this card doesn't look super impressive to a lot of folk, but this deck is specifically tuned to usually play this on turn 2, and that's when Drill Bit is basically Thoughtseize, and it's incredible in this format specifically. It gets Hydroid Krasis out of our opponent's hand, it gets Wilderness Reclamation out of their hand, counter spells, sweepers, spot removal, anything that would otherwise mess with our whole strategy. Yes, but any big cards they might need for their strategy or their archetype, we can get out of their hand too as quickly as turn 2 in many games. But obviously, especially if we're on the play, we don't mind playing this on turn 4 a lot of the time as long as we get the discount on it. Now, if we play this on turn 2, there's lots of options. Again, it can take away all their best options. There's spot removal, there's sweepers and such, but can also just take away the next creature that they were planning on playing on their 3rd turn or their 4th turn or whatever. So there's just a lot of play on this card, and it's very easy to proc Spectacle on turn 2 in this deck because we've got a lot of some fairly evasive 1-drops in some ways. But now let's get to the rest of the creatures in the deck other than just Spawn of Mayhem. I've mentioned that we have to play a lot of 1-drops in this deck. Not only do we want 1 mana play on turn 1, we want that pretty much every game, but in a lot of games we want 2 1 mana plays on turn 2 as well. So we have to play a lot of 1-drop creatures here. And we do. We got 15 1-drop guys in all, starting with Governor Ratcliffe over here, Vicious Conquistador, all 4 copies of this. I like it because it's effectively, on attacks at least, a 2-power dude for a 1-mana investment, which I'm kind of always into. I'll cash in on that, but it's also a really reliable way of triggering Spectacle. Even if they can block it, you're still going to get 1 damage out of it, provided that they don't have, removal when you declare your attack step. As long as it actually gets to attack, it guarantees a Spectacle trigger for you, and you need that, especially in the early game. If you have to run this in against something that's going to kill it, as long as you have a Spawn or a Drill Bit in your hand, you very often don't care. We're also running 4 copies of Gutter Bones in the deck. Another deck tech, another playset of Gutter Bones. This card's been in a lot this season already, but it's obvious why it has to be here. It's an actual 2-power 1-drop, unlike Vicious Conquistador. You can really say that about this card. And it gives you a fair amount of recursive, longer game advantage, and I think this deck needs a couple of pieces like that. Plus, the card is really, really good in multiples. If you've got 2 or 3 Gutter Bones in your graveyard in the late game, and you get a Spectacle trigger, it's party time, man. You get your Bone Thugs in harmony, and suddenly you've got a whole board reestablished. We got more 1-drops to get through here, because I also want to play 4 copies of Pilfering Imp, and I like to call him Pimp for short. This card does a few things in the deck for us. You know, it's a really, really cheap, evasive creature we can drop on turn 1 and nearly guarantee a Spectacle trigger on turn 2, and sometimes even on turn 3. A cheap flyer is really, really valuable in this deck, but this also allows us to get important stuff out of their hand too, just like Drill Bit. This is just another way of boring into a control player's hand to get those counter spells, get those sweepers, you know, in situations where we would otherwise win the game, unless our opponent settles our wreckage or something, then we can go ahead and get that stupid card out of their hand and attack away. And we'll round out the 1-drops finally here with Footlight Fiend at just 3 copies. And there were a few things you could try in this slot. I really wanted Blightkeeper here because, again, cheap, evasive, 1-mana creature that almost guarantees a Spectacle trigger if it lives. But that's the thing. If it lives. Like, Footlight Fiend had turned out to be much, much better at forcing a Spectacle trigger on turn 2 or 3, because you can swing in with this, and then, regardless of whether it gets blocked or shocked, you're still going to get a Spec trigger. But there are some 2-mana dudes that we want in this deck, and I've seen some people building this thing and trying to shoehorn in like 3 different 2-drops, but I don't actually think we need to do that. I think that there are 2 2-drops that we're pretty much forced to play. Outside of that, I don't really feel the need to play anymore, you know. But that said, I do think that Gary Mars is absolutely vital to the deck. Just a 2-mana play, that's 3 power. That's where you want to be in an aggro deck, so the body is right for the rate. But it's also another mana sink that gives you a pseudo-recursive option. You know, you don't get the creatures themselves back, but you still get another way of putting bodies on board in the late game and using your mana as efficiently as possible on turns where you just like draw a land or a 1-drop or something. Gary Mars can give you a lot of advantage and reestablish a board state after a sweeper pretty easily. But the other 2-drop that I feel that we just absolutely have to play a 4 of, no questions asked, is Kitesail Freebooter. Life choices aside, you know, devoted to life to piracy, effectively, in the pursuit of free boots. Every time I play this card, I think of the Let's Get Some Shoes guy from like 10 years ago on YouTube.
Let's get some shoes.
Every time I play Kitesail, I'm like, let's get some shoes. In any case, you can steal some pretty good shoes from your opponent in this format right now on turn 2. Even if this is relegated to like non-creature, non-land stuff, there's still plenty of, again, removal, sweepers, enchantments especially that you might want to pilfer from the opponent's hand. And against decks like Simic that don't really have access to a lot of good removal, this can be an all-star card. But the last of our 30 creatures in this deck is Midnight Reaper. Again, just like Gutter Bones, another deck, another 3 copies of Midnight Reaper. This has been in a lot of things so far this season already. But that's because I've done like 2 Aristocrats style decks so far, and it just goes in those. But we also need a way of drawing cards, keeping up the pressure, and not running out of gas in this deck as well. And Midnight Reaper is just, I think, much better than a creature like Ruin Raider for doing that. But we'll finish the main deck off here with just some removal pieces that are super important to the deck. We're playing 2 copies of Deadweight and 3 copies of Walk the Plank. You guys know I'm partial to Walk, especially in these Mono-Black Aggro decks. Just a 2-mana investment in a deck that's not really worried about playing at instant speed anyway, so we don't really feel the sorcery speed on this. And it takes out pretty much every creature that we care about. Deadweight is also insanely important to the deck. It's just a 1-mana play, and very often it's a turn 2 play. You'll go turn 1, any 1-drop. Turn 2, if they played Alana War Elves or any 1-drop creature. You'll deadweight that guy, get through with your 1-drop, and then drill bit them. It's a super important play, but deadweight is still good on turn 3, 4, 5, and even later on into the game. Even if it doesn't kill a creature, it can still cripple a creature to the point where it doesn't matter to us anymore. That's an important thing for a 1-mana card to be able to do. The deck wants 1-drops like Wizards want your money. Let me put it that way. You know, we have to play at least 20, we're actually a little bit over 20. 1-mana cards in this deck to make sure that we have the plays on turn 1, 2, and 3 that we need. And believe it or not, Deadweight is actually one of the better plays in the whole format for just a 1-mana investment. Now here's the lands. 21 swamps. You can do whatever you want. Aside from that, you know, you could play an Arch of Araska in here. Maybe some Cabal Strongholds if that's what you wanted to do. You could zhuzh this up if you wanted, but I don't feel the need to play more than this. 21 swamps works just fine. Now check out our sideboard here. We've got some action against control, like the obvious 4 copies of Duress. We can play up to 16 discard pieces against control decks and just decimate their hand in any hopes they have of doing anything about our onslaught. But we've also got Isarath the Awakener against control decks. This is another piece against just removal heavy decks in general. Isarath is very good against, but this is also a pseudo answer to Carnage Tyrant because it has the Death Touch. So do keep that in mind, but if you need a way of getting spawns and kite sails and such back, then Isarath is pretty good at that too. There's also Knight of Malice. This just comes in against heavy white decks. I shouldn't have to tell you that, but it's there for that reason. This is the #1 2-drop that other people are trying to like shoehorn into the main deck. I don't think it's that important for the main, but if you do run across like White Weenie or Boris Aggro or an Orzhov deck or something, this can be a very important card in the 2-drop slot. So keep it in mind. 4 of in the sideboard. We've also got Golden Demise. If we do run up again against aggro decks, this can be a game-ending piece once we do have Ascend, which actually doesn't take us that long to get in this deck. Aside from that, random 1-ofs, we've got a 4th copy of Midnight Reaper in there against removal heavy decks, control decks where we don't care too much about our life total. I think this is probably better than Ruin Raider and even Argel's Bloodfast in this deck because it's not only a way of drawing cards and punishing our opponent for playing removal spells, but it's also a threat on board, and I want as many of those as possible. And then we have a 3rd copy of Deadweight against the aggro decks, and 1 copy of Fungal Infection. This is against aggro decks that play 1 toughness creatures, and against decks that play Llanowar Elves. This can be a great play. Snipe their Llanowar Elves and improve your board state. Get yourself a 2-for-1, usually on turn 2, but very often on turn 1 if you're on the draw. Now, I did play a lot of the cards I wanted to play in this deck, but there's also a lot of flexibility here and a lot of different ways you could spend these slots if you wanted to. In the 2-drop slot, I like Direfleet Poisoner, another Death Touch creature outside of Isarath to deal with Carnage Tyrants, but there's also a Pirate or 2 that you could put into this deck. Kitesail Freebooter's already in the main, so there's definitely ways that you could use this, flash +1/+1 combat bonus to your advantage. There's a bunch of 2-drops you could pick for this deck, but I like where we ended up here. I just keep Direfleet Poisoner in mind for the people that are going to comment, play Poisoner. I'm with you. I could see putting it in the deck somewhere. Aside from that, I like Dead Revels more than I probably should, but this is basically a fine finality for us, and this could go as a 1 or 2 of in the sideboard if we wanted another late game piece for creating card advantage and getting some creatures out of our graveyard. I could definitely see Revels working. Aside from that, though, I like the idea of both Fell Spectre and Raider's Wake against control. We could bring these in as 2 or 3 ofs from the sideboard, one or the other, or possibly even, a split of both cards, and really punish control if we can resolve this card. So I like the idea of this as a finisher against control in games 2 and 3, but I wasn't, I didn't have the fortitude to really pull the trigger on it. But here are your power rankings. A final score of 62, not too bad, because the deck is only about 60 or 65 bucks right now on TCG Players, so right around $1 a point. That's not bad at all for a budget deck. And yeah, this is a fairly budget deck, even provided that we have to get like Spawn of Mayhem, and those are at least a little bit pricey. Not too much else in the deck costs that much. And honestly, some of these scores go up if we get an early game Spectacle trigger. Like if we're able to go turn 2 Drill Bit into turn 3 Spawn of Mayhem, this deck is really, really tough to beat. Even at the top tables, like for 60, 65 bucks, you're spending your money in the right place. If this deck actually gets the starts that it wants, it's really, really tough to deal with. And it fights really well against the mid-range and control decks in this format. We have so many ways of just meticulously picking apart their hand and taking away their best options that even if all we're really doing is getting in chip damage over the course of a longish game, we can still grind out wins that way. But sometimes all it takes, again, is a Drill Bit or a Kitesail Freebooter into a Spawn of Mayhem, and that's game, kid. Like a lot of decks just can't deal with that, again, especially the slower decks, where you have multiple turns worth of being able to play, Kitesail Freebooter into Spectacle Trigger Drill Bit, and what are you going to do, Wilderness Reclamation deck? Like, this is fairly good against some of the slower decks in the format. So give this thing a shot. I mean, I know that I haven't done a whole lot of budget decks this season, but that's one of the reasons I did a Brewer's Choice, is because I wanted to do a budget deck. You guys have been asking for them, and I wanted to do a good budget deck. And as far as the budget decks I've been messing around with this season, this is definitely the one that has like the highest, I guess, win rate outside of Burn. Burn is still a crazy deck, and it's really cheap, so I want to profile that one soon, too, but my patrons don't really want me to. But the patrons were into this one. I felt like it was a different deck, and it's a really good deck for fairly cheap, so if you want to try this thing out, do what you always do, what I always tell you to do. Just click the first link in the description down there. Go over to tcgplayer.com. They help sponsor my content. Full disclosure on that, they give me money for saying their name, but they're also where you're going to get this deck cheapest. So click the link in the description, order any pieces you need from my buddies, and just look at the deck list. If you want a place you can look at the deck list in a compact form, link is for that too. So do all the things as well as that. Support us on Patreon. If you just throw in $1, you get to help pick what decks we want to do. I may do Brewer's Choice here and there, but at least 2 videos a week are still going to be poll driven. So if you want to help pick what videos we even do around here, then throw $1 into the Patreon every month. And yeah, like and subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications, do all the stuff, and I guess I'm done for this one. I'm pretty sure there's supposed to be like a big game on of some kind tonight. Kickoff's in like 30 minutes or something as I record this. So probably going to get the video out like right after the Super Bowl. That's what you do. That's what you do. I wasn't even really aware who was playing in the stinking game until like 2 days ago, It turns out it's a lot harder to follow sports when you don't work in a sports bar anymore, like I did for so long. But a sports bar actually closed the day before the Super Bowl last year. What kind of a business plan is that? Like, how dumb? I haven't vented about this ever on camera or on social media or whatever, so take my opportunity to do it. That's like a GameStop closing the day before Black Friday. We're a sports bar. We close the day before the Super Bowl. How freaking stupid. But in any case, yeah, I just found out he was playing in this deck, or in this deck. That's how magic my mind has become. I just found out he was playing in the Super Bowl like two days ago. So I don't care, and you probably don't either. So I hope that you had fun. I hope you joined me here instead of watching that thing. Whatever. I love that I haven't had to devote any of my mind to sports to talk to customers or anything over the last year. I've just been able to solely focus on Magic, and I think it's been better for not only the channel but my mental health. So, in any case, I'm pretty sure that's all the babbles I have. That was story time with Dev for this video. I try to work one in at the end of every video, but pretty sure I'm done. So let me know how you felt about this one and anything else that you'd rather play down there in the comments section in the sideboard. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.